Also, we ask that you please keep your cameras off. If you have any questions, please type them into the chat. This will help us log and keep track of the questions, and we will monitor this and address what we can towards the end of the workshop. With that, I will hand it over to Chad Edison, Chief Deputy Secretary for Rail and Transit.
Thank you very much, Josh. Really appreciate it. And welcome everybody to our discussion draft guidelines workshop. This is the first workshop as part of our process of developing new guidelines for our cycle 5 of the TIRCP. And we will then be going through our process of making revisions based on feedback. We welcome comments, especially over the next 2 weeks on these. And when we put out our draft guidelines for formal review and 30-day review, they will reflect incorporation of feedback on many of the comments received. So would really appreciate your assistance here in both reviewing what we're starting with and in providing comments. And then if we want to go to the agenda slide here, that would be great. Next slide, please. I'll start out giving some background on TIRCP for those that are less familiar with it. We'll also talk a bit about funding expectations for the upcoming round, significant changes in the draft guidelines that have been incorporated so far, and then our timeline for final guidelines and awards. Some of that is still pending, some of the action that might be subject to legislative things that happen in the next month or so, and then general comments and questions where we have time for that. Next slide, please. In the first 4 rounds of TIRCP since 2015, $5.8 billion has gone out to 74 projects throughout the state. And our program has focused on providing benefits to priority populations throughout the state. Those are the disadvantaged communities, low-income communities, and low-income households, and has also had a geographic equity element to it to ensure that all regions of the state receive funding for competitive projects. Next slide. Okay, just as a few examples here, this is not a comprehensive list. You can find this on our website. We have had a number of transit and rail infrastructure, zero emission, and other bus projects, and rail car and locomotive purchases to support service expansion. The focus of our program includes primary requirements of increasing ridership while reducing GHG emissions, and also improving safety and network integration. These are some of the 4 elements that are primary to our program. And these projects all have many of these are happening on the projects that are listed here. Capital Corridor has an extension to Roseville that's been funded, improvements in Sacramento Valley Station. City of Inglewood is receiving funding for its Transit Connector project. We have a number of projects on BART, both core capacity in the Silicon Valley Phase 2 extension, extensions on LA Metro, a number of zero emission bus projects, both hydrogen fuel cell and battery electric. And then we have passenger rail projects like the Redlands Passenger Rail Project, which has a zero emission train set being purchased for it, and new fleet for expansion of service on SAC-RT and BART. Go on to the next slide, please. The overall TIRCP is a 5-year program of projects that are selected on a statewide basis. These are the list gets updated every 2 years, and so that is this 5th cycle that we're in right now with selections in 2022. Our primary evaluation criteria, which I just reviewed: emissions reductions, ridership growth, achievement of integrated service with other corridors and other operators, and safety benefits. And we also have a number of secondary evaluation criteria focused on the co-benefits from meeting broader sustainable community goals, providing benefits to disadvantaged communities, having housing and jobs considerations, and many of those look very similar to past cycles when you look through the guidelines. Going on to the next page, please. This time around, we've also been clear some of the places where our effort on CAPTI, the Climate Action Plan for Transportation investments, infrastructure investments, fits into our program in both the accelerated deployment of ZEV fleets on transit, on supporting pro-housing policies, and in supporting the rollout of contactless payment and traveler information that makes transit more visible and easier to use. These are all areas where we've both supported projects in the past that did these things, but also clarified where some of these could be competitive for the future as well. Next slide. The funding for TIRCP has generally come through the Transportation Improvement Fee revenue in SB1 and a continuous 10% appropriation from the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. There have been some one-time augmentations that have come from other sources, including General Fund, and the upcoming, the budget for this year has the opportunity for additional General Fund money to be contributed to TIRCP. This workshop will only focus on the fully enacted program resources currently available through the budget. Our estimate at this time, and this will be revised prior to our call for projects, includes approximately $500 to $600 million of new funding for projects statewide through fiscal year 26-27. On to the next slide, please. Governor Gavin Newsom continues to work with the legislature to enact a comprehensive transportation package that includes significant investments statewide. Those include $4.2 billion in general obligation bond funds for high-speed rail, as well as $3.4 billion of general fund for high-priority transit projects. That includes money in grade crossings, $500 million, $1 billion zero-emission rail equipment, active transportation, and climate adaptation projects. Of this funding, about $2.5 billion would be implemented through the 2022 TIRCP, but that is subject to necessary legislative action prior to the end of session. And that would provide $1 billion to deliver critical projects in time for the 2028 Los Angeles Olympics, $1 billion for transit and rail projects statewide that improve rail and transit connectivity between state and regional and local services, and $500 million to support high priority grade separation and grade crossing improvement projects throughout the state. Next slide, please. Here is, and for those that are wondering, this PowerPoint will be saved online. It'll be available on the CalSTA webpage once the PDF of this has gone through its remediation. So you should see that in the next day or two. The main changes to the guidelines on this round, we've added some references to CAPTI and the related executive orders. We have we provided more detail on pre-application and post-award technical assistance and how that will be provided. Both in supporting some of the project concept development, as well as the ridership forecasts necessary if you're having an impact on intercity rail, and then post-award some of the ways that will be provided. We've developed more description on the pathways to zero-emission fleet and facility investments that also increase ridership. There are a number of different ways to accomplish that that include efforts to grow the ease of use of your system and to reinvest savings, especially from transit priority projects, in additional service operations that will also increase ridership. So there's more detail on that on page 7. There's a reference to the role played by contactless payment in real-time traveler information and increasing ridership, and you'll see that in the document. And then we've updated the primary and secondary evaluation criteria to reflect the references to the specific pro-housing policies that HCD has been developing, and how those can play a role in showing benefits that are being achieved by your project, if those are in place in your project area. And then finally, we have updated a number of references in the document and provided in the back of the document in attachment 4 references to the CTC project allocation policy. This has been worked on since the last cycle, and these policies were adopted by CTC back in June of 2020. So those are the major areas that we've been working on so far. There's more to come as we both receive feedback from this workshop and comments that we receive, as well as we develop the draft document. Go on to the next slide, please. Our overall schedule here, I'll speak to this. It doesn't have all the dates in it yet, and that's in part due to the the expectation that we will have additional legislative input here as part of finalizing the transportation package in the budget. If that were to happen, we would have more content developed in the discussion draft related to the LA Olympics and grade crossing and grade separation project categories. And so you would see some of this that's out there now would be modified further. And then we will, a few weeks after those activities are finished, we will release the draft guidelines. We expect to do that in the fall of 2021. Guidelines workshops to follow in the 30-day after that period. That's what's statutorily required, is about 30 days after to do workshops. And then a few weeks after that, we usually do our call for projects and our release of our final guidelines. Applications will be due in early 2022 and project awards announced in the spring of 2022. So that is the current schedule, and expect to see this updated in the next couple of weeks with more detail. We are starting this process now so that we can keep the overall schedule as tight as possible and get things moving on the funding selection and project selection, so that those get done in a timely fashion as possible. This is especially important due to the need to pursue some of the federal funds that are out there, and where we think the leverage of additional capital project funding from California sources will help us receive federal funds that are being significantly increased in Washington, as it appears Congress is working on even this week. Next slide, please. So I'll end the kind of summary here with at this point, we have a website where on the CalSTA webpage where our information on the program as we go through this cycle will be posted. The PDFs and PowerPoints will be there related to these workshops, and as we work through our various drafts, they will also be posted on that webpage. Comments can be delivered at any time to the email address here, tircpcomments@dot.ca.gov. As Josh indicated, if you want to be recorded as having participated in this workshop, please also send your information to that email address. If you were a phone-in attender, we do have a list of participants that show up when you logged into Teams with your name, or into WebEx with your name if you did that. It would be most useful to provide comments on the discussion draft by August 27th, which is about 2 weeks from tomorrow. And now we will turn to some of the questions that are showing up in the chat. So far, I've answered one of them, which is, will the PowerPoint be saved online? Another question was, is there going to be a workshop in the Central Valley? At this point, it is, if we are still in a virtual workshop forum, it's more likely that we will actually focus our workshops on larger agencies and then smaller and rural agencies, rather than trying to do geographically based in-person workshops. We welcome feedback on that concept, but it seems that we are getting a much higher participation offering this in a virtual mode. And if we're able to do hybrid meetings where we do some of it in person and some of it online, we will also consider that. But it's at least been suggested to us that maybe we focus our two workshops that are statutorily required more on the distinct questions that might come from different size agencies, rather than just a northern and southern workshop or something like this. We also present our guidelines at the CTC and have some opportunity there as well. Another question that's come in, I'm reading these from the chat. Will there be an application template? Do you submit online? The question there is that there is a specific, in the call for projects, there is a outline of what information needs to be in the application. There is not an application template that we have used historically because of the significant differences between projects and information that is available. But if you'd like to see past call for projects to get a sense of what is in the application, or if you want to look at the section of the guidelines that highlights what needs to be in the application, that's a place to start. but there's not specifically an application template. There are certain forms that are available, such as the PPR and other forms that need to be filled out, and some of those are in either required forms that need to be filled out in that format, or templates that are there for your use. So let's go ahead and get to as many of these as we can. And to the extent that we're unable to answer questions that come through the chat today, we will also be producing a summary of answers, or if it's something that is we need to incorporate into our revisions to our guidelines in the future, we'll address it then as well. First, are there transit vehicle procurement standards? This is coming from Jim Allison. Whether rail, light rail, or bus, the state is supporting more than others, but things left quite flexible. We will get more detail on that in a future answer, but there are many different approaches to procurement that are effective, and we haven't highlighted one particular approach up to this point. We will provide more feedback on that answer later. Can you speak to how you are dealing with ridership gain in a post-COVID era? This is an area that we will need to provide more feedback on. We are in discussions with CARB on any changes we need to make in the methodology for modeling benefits, and so we will get an answer back to that here in the future. There's a lot of unknowns about ridership and how it returns, and so I think most of our agencies have the best information on what happened before COVID. This is definitely a challenging question to address. The pre-application meetings to discuss potential application concepts, modeling assistance. This is something that we highlight a bit in our section 4 of the guidelines. This is on page 4 of the PDF, if you want to look there. One of the very valuable roles that we have played in the past is to meet with agencies as they're considering their applications, to have structured discussions that allow them to understand better what elements need to certainly be addressed in order to have a strong application. And that is something we would advise everybody to take advantage of. It looks like on this cycle we will do 2 rounds of this input. And so especially for agencies that are new to the program, we encourage you to take advantage of those opportunities that are offered. We'll probably do more virtually, which will allow us to more efficiently meet with agencies. And I think that could be very beneficial to any potential applicant. One of the elements here that I think is we've seen applications for in the past, but we haven't seen as many agencies pursue them as we think we'll want to in the future, is what it looks like to pursue zero-emission vehicle replacement and facility investments, alongside making targeted improvements in your transit system that may not all be capital in nature, that allow you to grow ridership on your system, even as you're keeping your fleet at a constant size. Agencies in the past have come in with creative ways of doing this. We'd like to make sure that as many agencies as possible understand where they have projects that could be an opportunity to both, change the emissions profile of your fleet as you're trying to achieve zero emission status by the end of the decade, and also find ways to take actions that would increase your ridership and improve your integration with the corridors and operators around you. So that is an area that we think is particular benefit for many different sizes of agencies, and on the small and rural agencies, we would like to let you know that we see opportunities for you in this program as well, and that is something that we're putting additional emphasis on this round. Let's see, on the ridership side, the primary assistance from the state is in the area of your expected impact, either positive or negative, on intercity rail, where your service is connecting to or feeding in a significant way to that network. We will have the details on this as we go further along, and certainly in our call for projects. But that is a point where we we need to get certain information from you about your project design and project plans and service that you're going to offer so that we can provide that information that is important in your application. So if you're going to do a project that has intercity rail impacts, in order to be able to run some of those ridership numbers, we need that information in a timely fashion, so that you can reflect both the benefits and the impacts of your projects on intercity rail. In terms of project development, one of the questions here is, do we provide project development funding or program development funding? Not only for that activity, although in our program, if you are still a ways from construction, there are opportunities to have multiple phases of your effort funded in a single award. So you don't always need to be all the way through all of your design elements, but it does take, you are taking on additional risk when you come to our program and ask for money well ahead of having all of your designs finalized. We can fund projects that are outcome focused and with some flexibility in exactly how you achieve that outcome that is finalized as you work on your project. But that then takes, we can't give additional funding for the same scope, for the same project later if you come back and have a significant increase in your budget. So this is something to do under consideration. We also often find that agencies that are interested in TRCP may find another way in which the state can be a partner with them earlier in their project development, so that when they do come in a future round, they are more prepared for that and have a strong project to submit. So we've often found projects that apply to our program that aren't successful the first time often make changes or do additional work on their project, and the next time they come in, they receive funding. So I would definitely encourage agencies to consider different ways of pursuing the program. And that's where some of those technical assistance meetings at the beginning in particular, that first cycle of meetings that we expect to offer, that can almost serve as an opportunity for you to screen what you're thinking of to see if it would really match up now or if it would be better to apply for in the future. Going down the list here a little bit more, documentation of how their projects scored on a low, medium, high rubric. Yes, that is available to any agency that's submitted that wants to request it. We do debriefs with agencies that have submitted applications in the past, and we will provide any of that rating information and a discussion of the factors that led to it upon request, if you don't have record of that, or if you would like to understand that again, or if you have different people in your agency. We'd be glad to schedule time to do that. And so don't wait too long if you want to understand something that you haven't requested a debrief on before. The operating expenses. No, operating expenses are not fundable through this program for new or service expansion. But one thing I would point out that has been done by a number of agencies is that in many cases, our project will have the opportunity to perhaps reduce operating costs on your system. And in some cases, agencies have turned around and used those to fund the new service, or they've committed it to additional operations on another route. But this is a capital funding program, and we don't have money for operating expenses in our budget. Again, each situation is somewhat unique in terms of like where you might look for help in getting to that solution. And sometimes there are other state funding sources or other funding sources that can help you if that's a need. So if you have a specific concern, certainly come to us and maybe we can point you in a direction that would be helpful. Let's see, going further down the list here, I'm back about 9 minutes in time, so I don't know how many of these we will get through by noon, but we will do our best. There's a detailed question here from Craig Bosman asking whether we can speak to the relative importance of network efficiency, payment systems, integration when looking at zero emission fleet and infrastructure projects. That is something we will address further as we develop our guidelines. We will develop more feedback on what it looks like to have a relatively high rated project and so forth. In general, the more impact you can have through these various measures, the better in terms of looking at your project in its geographic context. As I said earlier in the presentation, we have a geographic balance in our program, and projects that are strong in the Bay Area or in Southern California look different than projects that are strong in the Central Valley or the North State or the Inland Empire. And so that's just something to note, that this looks different in different places and is somewhat relative to the scale of your project. Now, we evaluate, as you can look at past guidelines, we evaluate projects on a number of both quantitative and qualitative metrics. And so, certain measures like the cost per ton of the reduction in tons of GHG emissions, that is a significant measure that we use every cycle. And we look at that relative to the GGRF funds that are used on your project, or that are part of your award. And so that is one area where having more riders and having mode shift or having more people use your transit system clearly helps, as does that change in emissions on your existing fleet. But I would say, if there were two projects, one which did very little in this area, and in the same geography there was something that had a much higher ridership impact, that would probably result in a higher rating for that higher ridership impact project. So it's really, there is limited funding here. We hope to have a lot more funding when the legislature finishes its work in the next month, and that will allow us to reach further into the statewide needs, and different projects become more competitive if we've got additional funding. So there also are other sources, and this is an area that we're working on additional guidance. There are other sources of state funds from CARB, from the CEC, that put money into vouchers for buses. There's funding for fueling infrastructure. There's funding for facility improvements outside of TRCP, and those are often matching funds that can be pursued. They can allow you to further expand the scope. One of the things that is fairly unique about our program here is that we are looking for delivering, the original benefit or a better one. And so, to the extent that you can in the future get leverage to do more, to double the impact because you go and get federal funds or other state funds for your project, or you get additional local funding committed. This allows us to expand what our money can be used on to get to that broader benefit. And so this is a way in which many agencies have gone and done a broader scale project. One thing I will point out is that in many cases, an agency will come in and say, we'd like to replace 150 buses and run 10% more service, let's just say. And we may not have the money to do all of that, but their application also says we can scale that, and we can take half that level, or we can take it at any level, or it's something where the first 50 get us this benefit and the next 100 get us this other benefit. That really helps because in many cases a partial award can be made that fits into the resources available statewide, and so that is something we encourage agencies to indicate in their applications. Our TRCP available for both capital and pre-construction. Can you use it on PE? Can you use it on finishing your design, other kinds of activities? And the answer is yes, it can be. The earlier you are in that process, the more risk you might be taking with an application that requests funding across all those activities. But should you have the ability to manage that risk, we certainly can participate in multiple phases of your project, including the pre-construction activities, right-of-way purchase, utility relocation, we can participate even in finishing some of the key design documents and so forth. Going on, statewide procurement. Let's see, statewide procurements for payment system elements. Much of this is nearing its final state with DGS. So we have a number of contactless payment options that will be available. So agencies that would like to add that into their system, I believe that will be available on a statewide contract prior to the call for projects and certainly prior to applications being due. But we can get more information on that and circulate that in the next few weeks. The zero emission facilities. In general, we will provide. It might be helpful to hear from Emily Hurd on this additional information that she's looking for. But in general, when we've looked at zero emission facility investments, we see those as going alongside the bus investments and helping to make that facility able to handle an increased number of zero emission vehicles. So that if that's what is meant here, our original scoping of this includes the ability to pay for facilities that are involved in that. We also see those resources from CARB and CEC as being possible funding sources. Our agencies that provide funding for transit services eligible to apply. The guidelines do speak to this, and maybe we can get to the specific scenario for anybody that has that more detailed question of would you be eligible. In many cases, it depends on the responsibility you have for actually guaranteeing that the service will be provided afterwards. And so yes, agencies that provide funding for services but are not the operator have in some cases applied. There's usually a clear connection to the operator, and often it's a joint application or some other approach. Scott Spalding asked quite a detailed question on let's see, not all transit agencies have access to the same funding levels or the same sources. Some agencies do not receive any federal transit funding. Limited or no state transit funding may not receive local measure funding, making TRCP more important as a funding source. We will continue to address these kinds of questions as we go here. We overall do consider the differences in geographies and in local resources in terms of understanding what is possible within a particular region, and we don't expect everybody to come in with the same amount of local match, certainly, but it's kind of context and project specific is the general answer, and we will see if we can provide more information on that. And so I see another question here about, can you come in a cycle of TRCP asking only for certain phases like environmental or PE funding, and at this point, because there are not direct benefits tied to that is difficult to do unless there's already a funding source to implement some of the projects that would result from those studies. So it is generally the case that we get projects that already are developing and know what they are interested in having us fund, and we don't put money just into a project development activity in a given cycle with more money in the future. We do make multi-year awards where the funding for a project would flow over 3, 4, 5 years into each of those phases successively. So in general, construction is included in every project that we see, and then there's certainly the ability to grow in the future and add on additional phases or additional, to scale up and come back and ask for the new expanded scope in the future. The additional funding that is subject of the legislation right now will definitely be added into this cycle. So we see that as part of why we're getting a little bit of a later start than we would like, is that we are hoping that we will also be able to add that in before we're done with this process. The dates on that involve that being enacted by October for it to stay in the budget. Otherwise, that $2.5 billion goes back to the general fund. And then finally, can we fund cleaner diesel rolling stock, or is the focus only on ZEVs? We can speak in a little bit more detail to this. Certainly, if you're talking about existing operations and you're talking about running those with renewable diesel or facilitating renewable diesel instead of what you're currently operating, that can be an element in your application. In general, agencies that are talking about new acquisitions of diesel equipment do not get very good numbers when they work through the GHG calculators that CARB puts out there, and so most of those projects are not competitive. So zero emission is very much a focus of the overall program, and it's primarily tied to the fact that most of the projects that come in with good numbers include those elements in them. That brings me to the end of the questions that have been submitted up until about 2 minutes ago. I can wait here for a few more minutes and see if there are other questions. And then if there are none, we will try to pick up additional answers or summaries of our answers that we've made in this workshop in a written communications that we will post to the CalSTA website once that's completed. From Anthony Adams, I see for transit electrification infrastructure, an operations yard, can you use both local and regional bus service GHG benefits? Yes, you can. This is one thing I would emphasize in our program. If your project has benefits to another operator, if your services connect to them and feed in additional riders to that other system, and they have the capacity to handle your riders without a capital project of their own, that is a very important way of actually amplifying the benefits of your project. So the strongest projects often do have some of those benefits to connecting routes, connecting operators, and you can certainly claim the benefits of both operations, not just your own. That does need certain documentation and certain evidence of that other agency, wanting what you're doing with them, or having the capacity to handle what you're doing. That also points me to the value in having multiple agencies come in together for a program of projects that span both of their agencies. We have seen this in some cases when past experienced agencies that have come in and done a TRCP project bring along additional agencies in the region, and they come in for a new project together as like 3 or 4 agencies. That's been done effectively. We've seen capital investments that span 2 or 3 operators working together to get a better network result, and that is a very good thing to highlight in your application, because again, one of our primary evaluation criteria includes that working together with other operators in your region and having benefits across more than one system. The benefits that you get from the duration of benefits for your project is largely tied to the useful life of the assets you are acquiring. So if you are acquiring new buses, you could basically take your fleet plan at your agency, the policy you have for replacing those buses. Often FTA uses 12 years, but you can basically come in and say, this is the way that we replace our buses. We use them for 12 years. And that would generally be the benefit of a project that was largely a bus replacement or expansion as a major element. But to the extent that we have assets that are going to be used for 50 or more years, in many cases we use that 50-year useful life or some other documented useful life for your benefits, and that is really a critical thing here. If you are doing a project that enables a major expansion of service, and your infrastructure is expected to be used for much longer than the life of a bus that operates on it, or the life of a rail vehicle that operates on it, that is something that we can give credit for, is that long-term benefit. The ideal cost range, it's really not so much tied to the budget of the project as it is to the benefits of the project. So we have some very small projects that come in and successfully get funding. They might only get $1 million or $2 million or $5 million. And then in other cases, we have projects that come in and get 100 million or more. And with large amounts of additional funding, we can see much bigger awards than that in this coming round. So if we have that whole $3 billion plus, we could see much larger awards being made to individual projects. As a result of that, the cost per ton is one of the key calculations here. And you can look back at previous award cycles where we report the tons of GHG reduction and the amount of money awarded from the program. And that is a good way of understanding, kind of where projects were competitive. If you see a project with a high rating, those are often projects that are, well under $100 a ton on their benefits. And so for the cost of that GHG reduction. And in some cases, we've had projects, lower than $20 a ton on their benefits. But that's not the only measure we use, and it's not, and it's certainly given geography. You may have projects that don't score nearly as high in certain parts of the state that would still be very competitive. So I don't want to say there's one number that is the governing number here. In terms of the pro-housing designation, this is one of the ways that you can indicate the likelihood of achieving the kind of ridership that you are attaching to your project. One of the things that we're looking for is evidence of supportive policy at the local level that backs up your claim for increased ridership. If you have an area where there's no development permitted, where there's all these constraints that mean that jobs and/or housing are likely to not grow anywhere served by the transit project, that would almost certainly get to a bit of skepticism on the ridership numbers if you were then claiming 5% ridership growth per year for 50 years, just to give a kind of an exaggerated example. But the connection between the policies in place and whether they're supportive of your transit system growing and being able to accomplish what you're putting into your benefit calculations, that is an area of review that really shows up on the primary evaluation criteria for increased ridership, as well as being noted on the evaluation of the secondary criteria. We'll get to some of the further guidance here on various ways to show your benefits and document those. Those are good questions for more specific project applications. Jim, I see your question here, and I think we need to provide more detail as we look at specific projects. So where you can quantify things, that's great. Where you also have more of a qualitative understanding that these things will have an impact, but they're hard to model in a way that is quantitatively possible. That is, we have the ability to look at project benefits both ways, and certainly the quantitative helps, but it's not the only way to get credit for projects that are expected to have a positive impact on ridership and other measures. When we start to get to the specific nature of individual projects and how they look through the calculators, I think we need to be talking more specifically about individual agencies and how they, what kind of projects are in their region that they could pursue, and so I can't get specifically into how a specific CNG to zero emission battery bus conversion would fare in the program. There are often other things beyond just that conversion that can be part of your project. So just to be, help to have specific examples, but that's not the only thing you get credit for is the change in engine technology. You also get credit for other activities that increase ridership change increase the benefits on your system. So we will have the first round of pre-app meetings as soon as possible after the call for projects. And so that you should expect those within a few weeks, 2 to 3 weeks of the call for projects going out. We then expect an additional cycle about a month after that. So this is all, all in the last, in the last quarter of the fiscal year, or of the calendar year, that we would expect to be having these 2 sets of meetings. Okay, with that, I think we've received quite a few questions here and would be glad to stick around a couple more minutes, but I also don't see any more coming in right now. I hope this has been helpful to people participating today, and we'll go ahead, and Josh, if you can go ahead and wrap us up, I would appreciate that.
Thank you. So this does wrap up our workshop today on the discussion draft guidelines. Again, any additional questions can be submitted to the TIRCP comments inbox, and we will address those, as well as anything that kind of flows into the comments here over the next couple of minutes. We will continue to capture these, and we report them in a FAQ document. Again, a copy of today's presentation will be posted on the webpage. And we thank everyone for attending today, and we look forward to work with everyone throughout this process. Thank you.